Welcome back to Uncut and welcome back to another industry interview. Today with us, we have art director Jesse Rosenthal. Jesse is known for movies like Black Panther, Split, Creed, and today's topic, Sinners.
We had a fantastic time talking with Jesse, especially learning about how all of our favorite set pieces were built. We hope you all enjoy.
Before we go into the interview, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment so you can get more interviews like this from people that worked on your favorite movies.
Without further ado, here is Jesse Rosenthal.
So my name is Jesse Rosenthal, and I work as an art director on film and video projects, and film and television, I should say. And I got started in this industry many years ago. In high school, I was interested in theater and in theater design, more from backstage, working stage crew, and I got to do some design when I was in high school, and then I went to college. I grew up in California, outside of San Francisco, in Northern California, and so I went to first Humboldt State University and then University of California, where I graduated with a degree in theater arts, and then continued to pursue that by getting accepted to NYU in their theater program in the design department. And so I got a Master of Fine Arts in set design, and it was still primarily for theater. That was really where my interest was back then. And so I was doing set design and lighting design. And I quickly learned that it's very difficult to make a living as a set designer in theater. And I didn't really want to just go right into academics. So I started investigating other avenues that were open to us at the time. And so this was in the mid 1980s. I was living in New York with my wife, and so I slowly sort of started working on music videos, which were really big then, and I worked on the MTV studio set because a friend of mine designed it, and so slowly got more and more work doing, like I say, video, mostly video. So it was industrial videos and commercials, and I worked on a few after-school specials where they were a thing back then. There was a network thing. There was like an hour little drama that was sort of tween-based content. So I worked on a few of those, and that was interesting, and some really low-budget features. And then we started to have children, and so we didn't really want to raise them in the city, and we were still pretty broke at the time, and so we moved down to where my wife grew up, which was southern New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia. And so I started working down here. This would have been also in the late 80s, and doing the same thing. I was traveling up to New York a lot. It's only about an hour and a half, 2 hours away, and doing work down here in Philly. And again, it's a lot of TV commercials, a lot of, there's a lot of like pharmaceutical companies that would need video production. And I was doing a lot of set design. There was a studio that I worked with that had access to a shop, and so we would build the sets there. And then I guess it was like 2002, a TV show landed here. It was a CBS 1 hour drama called Hack, and it was about a cab driver cop kind of genre. And so I learned more about how art departments work on these are bigger union jobs. I joined the set designers union out of New York. It's United Scenic Artists Local 829. So I joined that in mid 90s, and then this was sort of my first foray into script driven content. And again, it was a 1 hour show. It was on for 2 seasons. So I was working as the art director on that, and it really gave me a lot of information as to how art departments run on these types of projects, as opposed to a much smaller TV commercial type project. And it interests me a lot more. Just you get tired of selling things, and I was more interested in the script-driven content, in more dramatic content. And so then things would come to Philadelphia and would film here either as an entire piece or as a they'd film here for a couple weeks. And they would hire me as the local art director. And I was sort of working my way up doing that. And by this time I was in my mid 40s, or late 40s. And uh, a movie came called Silver Linings Playbook, David O. Russell. And so the designer and I really clicked. And so it was a woman named Judy Becker. And so I was working mostly as what I would say a regional art director, in that I was working in this small market, Philadelphia market, and not really working outside of that. And so she asked if I could do a job up in Boston. It was American Hustle. And so by doing that, it kind of opened up, it meant that I was art directing now on projects that weren't just in my backyard. And so it sort of opened up more opportunities for other projects. So rather than just being a Philly art director, I was now more of an East Coast regional art director. And so I did a number of projects with her, um, and then with a few other designers, and it just slowly sort of snowballs into becoming a career. And I've been very fortunate in the jobs that have fallen in my lap, and sort of hooking up with designers that are getting quality projects. And so I have a number of projects under my belt that a lot of people have seen. And so it sort of builds your career. The the more better projects you work on, the more better opportunities you get. And I like to think that it's because I'm good at what I do. But a certain amount of it is luck as well.
It's so very interesting that having been born in California, you found your success in film in the East
On
Coast
the
of the
East Coast,
United
yeah.
States
Well,
because of
I never really worked I haven't worked in LA, and living in LA, growing up in Northern California, I never had an interest in living in LA, and ended up on the East Coast. A big part of it is my wife grew up outside of Philadelphia. We had met in California, but she came with me when we went to New York, and then we sort of raised our family here. I have two kids, and that's another part of why why my career kind of went that way was I didn't want to be an absent parent. And when you're working on film and television projects, it's much more time consuming than working on a TV commercial or working on a industrial video. Those projects might run for 3 days to 3 weeks or maybe a month. TV show can run for 8 months, and a feature can go from 4 months to 6 months. So it's a bigger time commitment, and I didn't want to be away from them. So when that job came to Philly in the early 2000s, both my kids were in high school at that point. So really, you're more of a chauffeur, and so I was fortunate that I had these opportunities as they came up, as I got older.
that's
Um, it,
absolutely interesting and
it,
definitely a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I've seen this industry can really rip couples apart, because of the time commitments. And my wife is not in the industry, and so we were able to get our health insurance through her, and she was usually more available. She had a more of a 9 to 5 kind of job, and so she was much more available for being for picking up the kids after school and things like that. It worked out well for us that way.
Getting into the movie Sinners, so your job on set was as supervising art director. Can you
Correct.
tell me a little bit about what that role is like and your task on the movie set?
Sure. So the art director or the supervising art director works underneath the production designer. The production designer is the head of the art department. So they're overseeing um, any like things that are built and painted. All this, they're in charge of all the set decoration, and they're also managing all the props. So set decoration, or so, if you think of my this background as a set, I would be responsible for the walls and the ceiling and the floor and if these cabinets are built, then we would build them. Set decorator, if the cabinets are purchased, they would get them, and then they would put all the other bits and bobs around that make the room a room. And then the prop person is dealing with anything that the actors are handling or coming in contact with by manipulating with their hands. So, like in Sinners, obviously the guitars and things like that were all props. We did some really large built sets on that show, and then also altered locations as well. So it's sort of a combination. So the art director is working right underneath the production designer, as does the set decorator and the prop master. And like I say, most of what I'm responsible for is anything that's built and painted. I'm also managing all the graphics. And so it's making sure that all of the people that are working underneath you are getting the information that they need in a timely manner so that they can do their work and produce what you see. And so I'm working with um, if I'm the supervising art director, it means that there are other art directors underneath me that I'm managing, as well as set designers, and then there's construction people. There's a construction coordinator. There's a charge scenic, which is like the head of the scenic department, and so it's making sure that everybody is on the same page, and there's a even flow of information coming through, and they know where to go to get it. The supervising art director also is in charge of doing all the budgeting for the scenic and construction, and and so I'm also working closely with the producers to make sure that we're on track in terms of, I give a budget estimate that I work out with the people that I'm working with, and then we need to make sure that we're not going over that, because that's a big part of my job, is making sure that it's guaranteeing that we can do what we say we can do within the budget that the producers have. And it's always a fine line, because a lot of times the designer is coming up with new ideas, or wanting more and more and more, and it's making sure that you've allowed for that in your budget. um and so yeah, the supervising art director is generally on larger projects where there's a lot going on, and so it's more than one person can really manage, and that way the production is dealing with me, and the designer is dealing more with me. I mean, she'll deal with the other art directors and the set designers and whatnot as well, but you're sort of the go-to person for what's going on.
And it's fair to say that Sinners was definitely one of those projects that has a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces, and also we were based in New Orleans, in town, and that's where our stage was. And then the locations were mostly an hour in a number of different directions. So they were pretty far, because there were certain things that they wanted. They wanted that farmhouse to be out in the middle of nowhere where you don't see anything else. And so it was hard. And then it had to be, I mean, obviously not, maybe not obviously, but we built that structure from ground up, and it had to be in a very specific spot in relation to the sun, where the sun was setting, and so and certain amounts had to be cleared away for it, and so it was a there's a lot of thought goes into what you think is hopefully think is just, oh, they found this great shack out in the middle of nowhere, but that's very rarely the case. So like the farmhouse was a complete build, Annie's shack was a complete build, the church was a complete build, and obviously the mill, both the exterior was at a location and the interior was built on stage. Um, so yeah, it's a lot, you're right. It's a lot of moving parts. And then there's other consideration. The downtown scene was in a town called Donaldsonville, which was like about 45 minutes from where we were, and it had a pretty good bones for the street. There was one big facade that we had to cover up because it was completely wrong, but the rest of the guts were pretty good. But then we did a lot of work to make it look the way that it looks. And the interiors of those two grocery stores were completely built out from raw space. We added all the signs and all the old trucks to put the dirt down, and all that. So that was a um, pretty big deal.
That's incredible.
I was gonna ask about the town because I think that was like you saw so much detail, especially with how the camera was moving, where you felt like it was like one continuous shot, so everything had to be
Yeah. Where
coordinated.
he had one shot that there are a few shots that he had planned that were pretty much scripted, where the black grocery store, you walk across the street to the white grocery store, then you come back with Grace. That was a definite planned, he had that one or planned from the beginning. And so we needed to make sure that the two stores that we picked were correct in relation to one another. Um, and um, and also, it was important to Hannah, the designer, that the businesses that were on the black side were very specific to the businesses that were on the white side, which were very specific to that race. And so it was keeping true to both of those worlds, because that's where they collide in that town, is right there, from the black side to the white side. And then this Asian person can walk in between the two. Um, and then I don't know if you noticed, right next to the grocery store, there was Rosenthal Ice, which is
Mm.
my name. But but Hannah chose to put that on the black side of the street, and there was a Jewish population back there then, but they were not, even though they were white, they were not necessarily considered equal. So it's like it's a lot. There's a lot of you're right. A lot of detail went into that, and she's very thorough with her research and getting everything right. And so that was a big scene for seeing a lot of that.
Really.
Yeah.
And you said the whole club farmhouse was built from the ground up. I'm wondering like how the designing process of that was like, what the build was like.
So she came up with the idea of doing it in like an abandoned lumber mill. And so did a lot of research on what those looked like. And so most of them were near some sort of water. Usually it was some sort of river, because they would float the logs down, and that would be how they would get the wood from where it's growing to where they want to cut it. So we wanted it on a river, some sort of waterway, and that was somewhat scripted as well for that whole end scene. Um, and so she came up with the idea, with which she kind of did a sketch of what this facade might look like. And then we started developing what the interior would be, and that kind of dictated to a certain extent what the front would look like as well. So it morphed a little bit, but it pretty much ended up looking a lot like what she had originally sketched out. And using materials that they would have used back then. And so we built this interior, was a two-story structure, and it was all pretty much built the way they would have built it. I mean, with we used real freshly milled large really large wood, and it was all freshly milled, so it was like as it sat in the stage it started to dry, and so it started to shift a little bit, but nothing crazy, but it's just the kind of wood that we ended up using. And so that was a pretty big build. And then the front facade, we did on the exterior, we did the front one side and then a bit of the other side, but the whole back is empty. And in like buried in there was two gigantic cranes that held up these light, big soft boxes that the DP used to light the night scenes. So it's like part of my job. So they had this big light box. It was 40 feet by 40 feet by about 8 feet tall. And they would have to park it right next to the stage because it can only go as far as the arm, this, if you imagine a construction crane, how far that arm is, it doesn't go forever. So they had to park this large light box really close to the set. And then we had to build essentially a 50-foot long, 10-foot high green wall, which is a bunch of plants that are living because we were out there for 6 weeks or so. And so you can't just like put a bunch of dead cut stuff there. It all has to be alive. And so then since you have this gigantic green wall, then it's obviously somebody's got to maintain it. So there's a lot that goes into it that you have no idea as a film viewer that any of that was there. It just looks like it's part of the surrounding, the surrounding green that was there. But we did a lot of work, obviously, like building that whole structure. It's a pretty large structure. And then to this behind it was this water. It was where we were working was an abandoned golf course. It was abandoned after Katrina, and then it had just gone to, a lot of weed trees and stuff grew up. There were some real good oak trees there as well. So a lot of the weed trees we cut down. We completely tilled all the ground to make it look the way that it looked. And then there was and then we obviously we put in the road, we put in the telephone poles, all that stuff. To the side, we had to, because it was on this water, and the water we couldn't control, and there were alligators and stuff back there. We dug a little trench to the side that was almost right up to the water, and then we lined that with a pond liner, and that way we could filter the water that they were actually dealing with. You could filter it and heat it a little bit, so it was more controlled. And then VFX made it look like it was all part of the same piece of water, but it was really its own separate little trench. And it was just working with stunt department, so it was a specific amount away for when Remick does his jump and all that. So yeah, it was like I say, a lot of thought goes into these that you have no idea, that hopefully as a viewer, it just all works and you have no idea that any of this is fake.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a pivotal scene as well.
Yeah.
And talking about scenes, I think we need to get into the one scene that everybody was talking about in this movie, which is
the surreal montage is how we referred to it. Yeah. And that again was also a scripted a scripted thing and a lot of discussions about what it was and how they wanted to do it, and a lot of that was more with costumes um, and camera. And so what we did was we had to build some things for to help the camera, the guy who was operating the Steadicam, to move around, and also ways to get set dressing pieces in quickly, like the turntables, and there were certain things that got added in as they were filming that oneer, um, that that were designed in. But again, a lot of it was sort of a combination of props and set decoration and camera department and grip department to make that whole thing work. And it really is such a magical, just thinking about it gives me chills. It's just it was such a great culmination of a lot of thought and a lot of really creative people, working at a high level to make that work.
We saw
Um,
in an interview that you actually had to burn the set down for this.
no, so what we did is we built um, so we had the real facade of the thing, and we were in a pretty big. We had cleared out a fairly large amount of field. It was probably maybe 500 yards, and so we created the sort of the footprint of the juke joint
Right.
in very basic terms with wood, and then I'm sorry, special effects then um, put in a bunch of pipe work to pump the propane in so that you could have this controlled burn, and and then it was all done so that it was specific to a crane that the DP had to come down and pull back and see Remick, and Bert, and to see them
Getting there.
viewing this whole thing, and then they cut to the real facade of our juke joint. Yeah.
I mean, that scene
Wow.
is just incredible. And now that you mentioned Remick, backtracking a little bit, and there's the one scene where we first see Remick that is all burnt down, and he jumps into the scene
hmm
towards a house where he finds two other people. That scene is very short, but did you have to build that house?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That whole house was built from scratch. And it was done, like I say, it was placed in a very specific spot. And it took us a while to find that spot, where it was out in the middle of nowhere. You really didn't see anything else. Um, and so it was built to look like it had been there for 60 or 80 years, but so that was a lot of scenic work that went into it. We could use some old wood, but it would be hard to find enough old wood that all looked right to build a house that big. So yes, it was a lot of scenic work, a lot of handwork. The and then VFX made it look like they were out in the middle of cotton, but it wasn't. It was we were in the middle of a sugarcane field.
I
So
see.
they don't really grow cotton outside of New Orleans anymore. It's almost all sugarcane. There's a lot of sugarcane out there. And so to make the two cotton fields that we had, there was the one in the beginning with Sammy, and then the cornbread scene later when they pick up cornbread. So we had these two cotton fields that we had to make in the middle of these sugarcane fields, and then VFX took it over. So we did about a 50-foot by 50-foot plot, and then VFX took over the rest of it. So the thing that the actors are interacting with looks real, and then the rest of it is VFX world. But to maintain these cotton fields, we didn't really use cotton plants. We were shooting in the spring, and cotton doesn't come to fruition until the fall. we used hibiscus, which looks a lot, the plants themselves look identical to cotton plants. The thing about hibiscus is they make flowers all the time. Like every day, they're making more and more flowers. And so the day before we filmed, we had the greens. So the greens crew went in and they also had to reconfigure how the berms of the sugar cane is different than what it would have been for cotton. So they had to redo that, plant 350 pots of hibiscus, and then pluck all the flowers. And then you can buy cotton bowls that look, they use them for decorative purposes. So we bought thousands of those and hand wired each one on to the plants. And so they would pick an area and then they would either move to a different area or they would rewire new ones on. And you can kind of see when you look at the movie, you can see there are areas that have been picked, and then everybody else is working in a different area. And so the problem that we had was we shot the cornbread scene first, and then there was a problem with the film, and it became a whole insurance claim, and they weren't able to get back to that field for another 6 weeks. So we had to maintain that field, which meant sending a guy with the water truck out there like 3 or 4 times a week at least, because it was hard to count on rain to water all these plants. Because it wasn't like there was irrigation or anything like that out there. We were out in the middle of nowhere. And so that was a huge expense that I hadn't anticipated, that we just kind of had to eat because, you know, it's hard to anticipate that kind of that kind of thing happening. Um, the Sammys went much more according to plan, and so we didn't have to hold it for like that. But that kind of stuff happens. It's just part of it.
Right. So this is not the first time you've worked on a Ryan Coogler film. You've also worked on Black Panther and Creed. I was just curious,
Yeah. So
like,
so yeah. So what happened was Creed came to Philadelphia, and so Hannah sought me out because I'm sort of the the most experienced Philadelphia art director. And so that was our first project together, and it went really well. And so um, she was able to get me onto Black Panther, the first one. And what I did mostly on that one was there's a whole sequence where they go to South Korea, and they go to an underground casino, and there's a big gun battle down there, and then they come out, they get in their cars, and they drive off, and then there's a big car chase through the streets of Busan, South Korea. And so I was in charge of that whole sequence. So there was a part in the beginning where they come to this fish market. It's called the Jigalchi Fish Market, and that we recreated in Atlanta. So it was a very large set, very somewhat complex because of all the set dressing that we had in there to make it look like there's all these fish stalls, and it was a pretty big dress and it looked great. And so then the part with the underground casino, that was a whole built set, and that was a different art director that had done that. And then they come back out, they get in their cars, they drive kind of around the corner, and then we pick them up and we're in South Korea. And so I was in South Korea for a number of weeks to oversee filming that whole sequence. So so that was both what they call first unit and second unit. So first unit is the unit that is shooting the actors that are speaking, and second unit is shooting a lot of the action that's not where there's no really spoken dialogue. It was it's a lot of the stunt work and things like that. And so most of this was second unit. Any of the dialogue was shot in Atlanta with green screen, like the talking to each other in the cars and things like that. Um, and so Hannah wasn't there for that. She was in Atlanta when we were shooting this. So since we had worked together before, I think she trusted me to kind of oversee this part. And I was interacting with her, but it's a when it's night there, it's day in Atlanta. It's on the other side of the world, literally. So it was, there was only so many hours in a day where we could actually communicate in real time. But we were keeping in time, sending her a lot of pictures and things like that of what we were doing. And then so I was also responsible for hiring the local crew for the art department that we used in Korea. It was a really interesting. I've never worked internationally, so from that standpoint, it was really interesting to me. And then on the second one, I was working in Atlanta. There were a number of sets that I did on Black Panther 2. And then she and I have done a number of other projects without Ryan. And so, we've had a fairly long collaboration. It's been really nice.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just gonna say that you mentioned it's now been 7 years working with Hannah. That sounds like a really great
Seven
collaboration.
projects. Yeah.
7 movies,
Yeah,
sorry.
7 projects. And so yeah, that is like I say, that's been a really nice collaboration. And she's done all of Ryan's projects. So she did Fruitvale Station and as well. I didn't work on that.
All the information you've given us today just really speaks to the amount of detail in your work, the amount of detail and care on Hannah's and Ryan Coogler's work, and it really shows and shines on the big screen. And once you have all of this information, it makes so much sense the amount of work that goes behind these movies and
Yeah.
why they look so amazing in the theaters. To close it out, what piece of advice would you give to someone who wants to be um, to work as an art director or a
Yeah,
production?
I'm at the tail end of my career, and I I feel that the industry is going to change. AI is going to somehow affect what we do, and I think it's too early to know exactly how it's going to change it, but I think that it's if producers can figure out ways to do things that are cheaper, they're going to. And hopefully it's not going to affect the way things look, but because a lot of the AI that you see now I mean, some of it looks okay, some of it is just total crap. And it doesn't really, I think if it's in the hands of somebody who is experienced, they might be able to get a better look. But it's it's hard to say how this industry is going to go. The other thing is there was a lot of like before the pandemic, leading up to the pandemic, there was a tremendous amount of content being produced, probably almost too much. And I think a lot of people started to get into the industry because it was very easy and you could move up very quickly, um, even if you didn't have that much experience, just because there was so much work going on. Right now, things are not like that. It's very quiet out there, and it's a lot of work is going overseas. Um, and it's mostly because it's cheaper to do it elsewhere. And I think there's also a reaction to the long strikes that the actors and writers had several years ago, and this sort of reaction from the producers just saying, "Okay, you guys, we settled all that, but now we're going elsewhere." Like Marvel has completely moved out of Atlanta; they're almost all in London now,
Wow.
and so it's just the industry as a whole is a lot in the United States is a lot slower right now than it had been in the past like 7 or 8 years. Um, so that's unfortunate for people that are coming up, younger people that are coming up. But I would say if you are trying to come up, it's easier. The path that I took is a little trickier because I moved to a sort of what you would call a non-production city, and I was lucky that these jobs that it happen the way that it happened. There's a lot more work in New York and LA and even Atlanta, even though all those towns are down right now in terms of work, and there are a lot of people that are looking for work. I do think that things will come back to a certain extent. But it's like any industry, it ebbs and flows, and it'll be interesting to see how these new tools that people are going to have with that AI will allow us to do, um, how it's used. And it could be really creative for low budget projects as well. They might be able to get a much better look through through it. I don't know. Like I say, I'm at the tail end of my career, so I'm at a different place than somebody who is in their mid 20s or mid 30s. Um, yeah, it's not the easiest career. I can say that.
For sure.
Um, and I found it incredibly satisfying. So,
We've been asking all of our interviewees what is their favorite movie and why.
oh boy. That's a tough one. I mean, for me, I was really impressed with some of the sort of older classic movies like Citizen Kane or Casablanca, or some of these older movies that didn't have the tools that we have, but still cre creatively solved a lot of really challenging problems. Um, so it's so for so that said, it's God, it's a tricky question. There's so many different things that make a movie good or bad, or you know um, that are effective. But some of those older classic ones, where they didn't have the VFX tricks that we have now, um, had a big effect on me when I was much younger and getting into this industry.
Awesome. And Jesse, is there anything that you're working on right now or you're about to start working on? And where would you like people to follow you, if any?
Well, like I say, because the industry's down right now, I haven't been working for the past 6 months. I finished a project in New York last December, and so well, it was a sort of a cop genre with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, and it'll be on Netflix. But we'll see. Hopefully something will drop in my lap soon. I'd rather not retire. I could if I had to, but I'd like to think there's a few more jobs out there for me. Um, but yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Enjoying my grandkids.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jesse. It was absolutely amazing talking to you today. Hopefully, we can have you here back for your next project.
Okay, sounds good. Let me get my hands in the right place and cut.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Uncut. You can follow us on all social media, starting with Instagram as Uncut the podcast. You can also follow us on YouTube as That Film Couple, which is the same handle for TikTok, That Film Couple for short form content. You can also follow us on Twitch as Sebasparra1K. And if you're watching right now on YouTube, you can find us on any podcast platform as Uncut exclamation mark. Last but not least, you can follow me on Instagram as sebi.mp4.
And you can follow me at caitlin.mp4.
Thank you so much for being here one more week, and we'll see you in the next one.